My phone vibrated on the kitchen table while I was washing the dishes. When I glanced at the screen, it wasn't a regular text message, but a location alert. He'd said he was giving a coworker a ride. But the blue dot on the map didn't lie. He was parked at my sister's house. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet, as if the world had changed in seconds. My eyes remained fixed on the screen, unable to blink. My heart was racing so loudly it seemed to echo through the silent night air. I remembered his words, "I'll be back soon, it's just a ride." I repeated them in my mind, trying to find some logic, but nothing fit. The more I stared at that address, the more betrayal overcame me. Instinct told me it wasn't a coincidence. I gripped the phone tightly as if that test might burn my hands. My mind filled with questions, but my body remained paralyzed. There, in that moment, the trust of years shattered in seconds. I knew I needed answers, even if they hurt. What awaited me after that screen could change my entire life. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding my phone. The screen illuminated the dark room, revealing my fixed location at my sister's house. My thoughts raced, trying to find a plausible explanation. Maybe he'd gone to get something for her. Maybe it was a coincidence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I mentally relived every detail of our routine. I remembered how he'd come home with increasingly rehearsed excuses. Heavy traffic, meetings stretched out, I had to take care of an urgent matter. At first, I believed him, but the pieces didn't fit, and now that notification was the missing link. I also remembered his smile when he talked about my sister. Always full of compliments, always overly attentive to the little things. I thought it was just courtesy. After all, she was part of the family. I never imagined there was more to it. Now, every memory felt like a warning I chose not to see. The weight of betrayal wasn't just marital, it was familial. The wound didn't just affect me, but also the blood bond. It was as if two people I loved had silently united against me. The pain seemed multiplied, impossible to measure. I stood up, walked around the living room, and looked at the family photos on the shelf. Birthdays, trips, laughter, captured in frames. I tried to understand where the truth had begun to slip away. Those images now seemed like lies, as if hiding what was really happening behind them. I grabbed my coat and considered driving to her house. The thought of seeing them together gnawed at me, but part of me trembled just imagining what I would find. I didn't want to scream, I didn't want a scandal, I wanted proof. I needed to be certain before any confrontation. I looked at my phone again and took more screenshots. The location didn't change. This couldn't be a mistake. Each screenshot felt like a punch but also a shield. I knew that, at some point, he would try to deny it. And I needed to be prepared. I sat back down and took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. The mind of a betrayed woman becomes almost like a radar. I remembered the strange perfume in the car the week before, the trail of deleted messages, the different tone of voice when he answered calls near me. Everything was starting to make sense. When we first met, he'd called me his safe haven. He kept saying he'd never have eyes for anyone else. I believed him. Over the years, our life had seemed stable, solid. Now, every word echoed with irony. The promise of fidelity had turned into a grotesque shadow. I ran my fingers over the ring on my finger. It felt heavier than ever. How many vows fit within a metal circle? How many can be broken without realizing it? That ring, which once brought hope, was now a cruel reminder of what was in ruins. The feeling of being deceived is like a poison that spreads quickly. It starts with small doubts, then takes over the entire body. My stomach felt churning, my throat constricting, as if there wasn't enough air. Still, there was a strange force keeping me going. I remembered last Sunday with my family. My sister and he were talking in the kitchen, laughing about something they hadn't told me. At the time, I thought it was normal. Now, reliving that scene in my memory, I realized how blind I'd been. Their complicity was already there, right in front of me. I felt a deep anger at myself, for not listening to my intuition sooner, for believing too much. How many times had I ignored signs because I wanted to keep the peace? How many times had I chosen silence to avoid arguments? I myself had fed the lie without realizing it. I reached for a glass of wine, trying to calm my nerves. The liquid tasted bitter, even though it was sweet. The taste of betrayal seemed to permeate everything. The wine, so often part of happy moments, was now just a cheap anesthetic for the pain. I looked out the window and saw the silent street, as if the world continued indifferently to my chaos. It gave me a strange sense of loneliness. Life outside continued, while mine seemed to have stopped. It was like being trapped in a movie that only I was watching. The clock was almost midnight. He still hadn't returned. Deep down, I knew that when he arrived he'd bring the same old excuse. Maybe even invent a new detail to give it more credibility. But this time, I had something I'd never had. Proof. I replayed our old trips on my phone. Me smiling for the camera, him hugging me. The contrast was painful. The man who swore eternal love to me was now across town, in the bed of someone who shared my blood. The betrayal tasted more bitter than any other. I knew I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. The news that my husband was with my sister would be devastating for the entire family. The scandal wouldn't just affect me, but my parents, my nephews, everyone. It was a bomb that, once detonated, would be irresistible. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the two of them together, laughing, touching, talking about me. That scene repeated itself like an internal torture, impossible to control. I knew it would never be the same again. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, my phone still in my hand, as if it were my silent ally. The screen would go off on its own, but I would turn it back on, checking to see if the blue dot was still there. And it remained, fixed, undeniable. I remembered the first time he brought me flowers for no reason. I thought it was sweet. Now I realized those flowers coincided with the night he'd arrived late. Was it a way of making up for it? How many times had gestures of affection been just disguises for lies? My breathing became heavy, but there were no tears. The pain was dry, raw, sharp. It wasn't crying that wanted to come out, it was screaming, but I held it in. I knew I needed strategy, not loss of control. Screaming wouldn't bring answers. Silence would. The memory of our wedding anniversary came like a knife. He'd seemed distant that night, but he excused it with tiredness. Now I understood. Maybe he was torn between two tables, two lives, two loves, and I was just the official version, the most convenient. With each thought, anger grew, but along with it, a coldness also set in. The betrayal transformed me, molded a new version of myself, version that no longer believed in empty words, a version that wanted proof, wanted justice. I opened social media and began to notice details. Likes on old photos of my sister, comments disguised as jokes, it was all there before my eyes. How had I not noticed before? Maybe because I didn't want to see. Maybe because the truth was too heavy. My sister had always been discreet, reserved. I never imagined I could cross that line. It was more than a betrayal of love. It was a breach of family trust, a wall that, once torn down, could never be rebuilt. The sound of the front door opening pulled me from my thoughts. He had arrived. My heart raced again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. I wanted to hear what he would have the courage to invent. His footsteps echoed down the hallway. I stood still, pretending to be calm. He came into the room, gave me a quick kiss on the forehead, and said, "It took me a while, but I managed to figure it all out." I just nodded, holding my phone hidden in my hand. The lie had a distinct scent, almost palpable. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if I were the same as yesterday. But I wasn't. Something inside me had changed and he didn't notice. The innocence was gone. I smiled slightly, not out of happiness, but out of irony. I knew where he was coming from. I knew who he was with. And now, with proof in hand, it was only a matter of time before the sandcastle crumbled. The game had begun, and I was more prepared than ever. The next day, I woke up earlier than he was. I watched him sleep peacefully, breathing deeply as if he had nothing to hide. His calm irritated me, but also strengthened me. It was proof that he trusted my blindness too much. And that gave me the advantage. I made breakfast as usual, toast, black coffee, and sliced fruit. He came into the kitchen, gave me a quick kiss, and mentioned the meeting he had at work. I feigned normalcy, but every word seemed rehearsed. The habit was the same, but his gaze no longer fooled me. While he got ready, I opened my computer and accessed the location app again. There were still records of the previous night's history. The trips to my sister's house were saved. I took screenshots of everything, organizing them in a secret folder. That would be my silent weapon. I remembered the times my friends had commented, "You're too trusting." I always replied that trust was the foundation of any marriage. Now I realized that this very trust was what made me vulnerable. Not trusting was never the problem. The problem was trusting someone who didn't deserve it. During lunch, he called to let me know he'd be late. He said he'd gotten caught up in an unexpected commitment. His voice sounded confident, unhesitating. But deep down, each excuse felt like a replayed script. I mentally jotted down every detail, creating my own dossier. I spent the afternoon recalling moments that had previously seemed trivial. The day he changed his cell phone password for security. The excuse that he had to work late on days that coincided with my sister's day off. Everything now formed a straight line of clues. My sister called me later to ask how I was. Her voice sounded natural, but there was an awkward pause in each sentence. I sensed hesitation, as if she were carrying a heavy secret. I smiled and responded calmly, without giving anything away. That call only further confirmed my suspicions. I decided I needed to observe slowly. Haste is the enemy of those who investigate. I took a deep breath and determined I wouldn't do anything without irrefutable evidence. Because when the time came, he wouldn't be able to deny it, and I would be the owner of the truth. During the night, when he was already asleep, I grabbed the smartwatch he was charging in the living room. I accessed his heart rate records. I noticed spikes at times when he said he was in meetings. My stomach churned, but my brain remained cool. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. I returned to bed and stared at the dark ceiling. The silence was deafening, but my mind was racing. The confidence that had once sustained me now fueled me with anger and clarity. I knew I needed to play smart. This wasn't the time for outbursts. It was the time for strategy. At work, I began to observe more. Colleagues commented on small things, like messages sent at odd hours. He seemed distracted in online meetings, frequently turning off his camera. Small habits I'd previously ignored now screamed out at me. At the gym, I noticed him replying to quick messages between sets. His cell phone never left his pocket. I already knew there were more secrets there than work contacts. The feeling that I was living with a stranger grew with each passing day. I decided to take a closer look at his bank statements. Small purchases at bakeries near my sister's house. Spending at odd hours, incompatible with the hours he claimed to be at work. The betrayal also had financial consequences. The truth never comes alone, it always leaves its mark. I remembered the times he'd talk about saving for the future. Meanwhile, he'd spend it on secrets. The contrast hurt. It was as if every penny invested in the lie was being ripped away from the life we were building together. At home, his gestures began to seem overly rehearsed. The kiss, the hug, even the jokes. Everything seemed measured to maintain a facade. But the more he tried to appear perfect, the more I saw cracks. It was impossible to hide from those who had already decided to see. I began to notice even the simplest details. The way he kept his phone face down, his rush to shower as soon as he got home, his nervousness when I asked casual questions. Every detail was a grain of sand that formed the dune of truth. One night, he left his unlocked phone in the living room. I took a deep breath before picking it up. I didn't find any obvious conversations, but I did notice numbers erased from the call history. I wrote everything down. Even the emptiness spoke volumes. My sister, on the other hand, began avoiding me at family gatherings. She always had an excuse to leave early or not show up at all. Her distance spoke louder than any message. It was as if she couldn't bear the weight of the charade. One day I decided to discreetly follow him. I got in my car and stayed a safe distance away. I watched as he left work, and, instead of heading home, turned onto a familiar street. It was the way to her house. My heart leaped into my throat, but I remained calm. I parked a few meters away and watched. I watched as he parked, got out of the car, and entered through the gate as if he already knew the place. The scene was brief, but enough. My breathing became heavy. It was like watching the confirmation of something I already knew. I started the car and drove away slowly. My mind was racing, but my hands were steady on the steering wheel. That scene would never leave my memory. It was visual, real, impossible to erase proof. I already had screenshots, a history, but seeing it with my own eyes was the final blow. At home, he arrived later, making up yet another excuse. I listened in silence, pretending to believe him. Deep down, every word he said was now another entry for the list of lies. I no longer felt like a wife. I felt like a detective living with the enemy. I wondered how many women had been through the same situation. How many had discovered betrayals within their own family. The pain was universal, but in that moment, it felt uniquely mine. The weight was unbearable, but it also made me more resilient. I decided to write everything down in a hidden notebook. Every schedule, every excuse, every detail observed. It was my secret diary of truth. I knew that, in the future, these notes would be my ultimate weapon. He wouldn't stand a chance against such well-documented facts. At times, the urge to confront him was overwhelming. But something inside me told me to wait. The right moment would still come, and when it did, it would be devastating. Patience is the greatest enemy of those who lie. I began to notice his gaze during family gatherings. When my sister was present, there was a different glow. Small, but noticeable. It was the silent language of someone sharing a secret. I observed everything without revealing anything. On sleepless nights, I wondered what would drive a sister to cross such a line. Was it envy? Was it need? Or simply human weakness? Whatever the reason, the result was the same: an open wound that wouldn't heal. The most painful thing was thinking about how my trust had become a weapon against me. He knew I didn't suspect. My sister knew I would defend her against anyone. They used that. Betrayal always stems from what was supposed to protect. I looked in the mirror and no longer saw the same woman. There were marks of fatigue, but also of strength. I was learning to live in silence, studying their every move. It was painful, but it was also my process of rebuilding. And deep down, I knew, with every lie he invented, with every glance she averted, their downfall was closer. Because no secret can stand the test of time. And time, this time, was on my side. The next morning, he left in a hurry, saying he had an important presentation at work. I stared out the window as his car disappeared down the street. I held the still warm coffee in my hands, but the taste no longer made sense. The habit of routine hid secrets that were now clear to me. I felt every detail like an invisible knife. After the door closed, silence filled the house. I walked to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I grabbed my phone and revisited the evidence I'd already gathered. Screenshots, location history, spikes on the clock. Everything was there, every piece of the lie carefully stored. It gave me strength. While showering, I thought about how life can change without warning. One tap on my phone was enough to shatter years of trust. The sound of falling water reminded me of tears I didn't have the courage to shed. Because crying would be admitting fragility, and I couldn't allow myself to weaken. At work, I kept my expression firm. I talked to colleagues, attended meetings, but inside my mind was elsewhere. His face kept flashing through my mind along with my sister's. It was impossible to separate the images. Everything seemed blended into a single pain. That afternoon, I received a message from him saying, "I'll be late again today." I read and reread those simple words. The same pattern repeated itself. It was almost predictable, but still each time I read it, my heart sank. I couldn't get used to the weight of the lie. I decided not to respond immediately. I waited a few minutes as if I were busy. I simply wrote, "Okay, be careful on the way." A short, emotionless reply. He didn't notice anything. I knew silence would be my greatest weapon. Silence makes a liar feel too secure. I called my mother just to talk. Her voice brought me some calm. We talked about simple things, like recipes and neighborhood news. But deep down, I thought about how devastating it would be for her to discover what was going on between her own son-in-law and her youngest daughter. At the end of the day, I decided to cook something different. I prepared a full dinner as if it were a special night. The table was set, the house smelled fragrant, everything was in order. When he arrived, he would find the perfect image of a stable home. And at the same time, every detail would be part of the trap I was setting. He came in later, claiming he was exhausted, his jacket over his shoulder, his cell phone clutched in his hand. I looked him in the eye and asked, "Was the day productive?" He responded quickly, almost automatically, "Very, but tiring." There was no weight in his words, but his body betrayed tension. During dinner, I kept the conversation light. I asked about work, about colleagues. He answered as always, but he looked away at times. It was as if he couldn't sustain eye contact for long. I noticed every detail, every involuntary gesture. His cell phone vibrated on the table. He quickly turned it over and said, "It's just the work group." I smiled slightly and continued eating. Inwardly, I made a mental note of the gesture. The reflex to hide something is more revealing than any message. After dinner, he went straight to the shower. I took the opportunity to check his phone. This time there were only recent messages, nothing compromising. But I noticed a hidden app on the home screen disguised with a generic name. I took a photo of the screen to investigate later. When he returned, he flopped down on the couch and turned on the TV. He feigned relaxation, but his gaze was distant. I sat beside him, crossed my legs, and watched in silence. Sometimes silence is louder than any accusation. He seemed restless. His touch on me no longer felt the same naturalness. When he placed his hand on my shoulder, I truly missed it. It was a mechanical gesture, almost an automatic habit. True affection had been lost somewhere along the way. I could feel it firsthand. I didn't need words. That night, I lay in bed before him. I pretended to be asleep as he lay down beside me. I heard him fiddle with his phone under the blanket, trying to be discreet. The glow of the screen reflected off the ceiling. I breathed deeply, controlling my anger, but inside I recorded every detail. The next day I woke before my alarm. His phone was charging in the living room. I opened the app I'd photographed and saw it required a password. I couldn't access it, but the fact that it existed was enough. Another piece of the puzzle, another certainty within me. I made coffee in silence, while I thought about the scene from the previous night. He left as usual, with a hurried kiss and a ready justification. I remained there, staring at the closed door, feeling like the drama had a set time to end. I called a trusted friend and told her only part of this story. I said I'd noticed strange things, but I didn't mention my sister. Her reaction was immediate. Follow your instincts because they never fail. That reinforced my certainty that I wasn't exaggerating. I spent the day with my head spinning in 1,000 directions. It was difficult to stay focused on work, but at the same time, the disguise was necessary. I needed to continue life as normal so he wouldn't notice. The more he believed he was safe, the more proof I would have. That afternoon, I received a text from my sister. "Can we see each other tomorrow? I want to tell you something." My entire body froze. What could she possibly have to tell me? Was she going to confess? Or was this just another lie to cover it up? Doubt consumed me until nightfall. I decided to accept the invitation. I replied calmly, "Of course we can." The simple act of writing that sentence felt like an internal battle. I didn't know if I was ready to hear from her what I had already seen with my own eyes. When he arrived home that night, I noticed he was lighter. He seemed relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted. I smiled, feigning normalcy, but inside anxiety gnawed at me. Something told me the meeting with my sister would be decisive. In the early hours of the morning, I woke up to him snoring beside me. The room was dark, but my mind was too clear to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how far they had gone. How long had this been going on? The emptiness of answers was worse than the betrayal itself. I got up, went to the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. I drank a glass of water, trying to calm my heart. The house seemed enormous in the silence of the early morning. I thought about how, the next morning, I would have to face my own sister. The weight of that expectation crushed me. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, controlling my breathing so as not to wake him. He slept peacefully, while I waged a silent war within myself. The contrast was suffocating. My cell phone vibrated on the nightstand. I grabbed it quickly, hoping it was something urgent. It was a bank notification. Another purchase made near my sister's address. It was as if the universe was constantly throwing truths at me. I rested my head on the pillow and closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt the coldness of certainty enveloping me. Trust was dead. And when trust dies, no marriage can survive. I already understood that. I thought about how I would tell my children, my family. The consequences were too great to be confined to a single decision. The betrayal wasn't just me. It was against everyone who believed in the bond between us. This realization weighed more heavily than any individual pain. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of a family dinner. Everyone gathered, laughter at the table, but the knowing look between him and my sister was clear. I woke up startled, with the feeling that the dream wasn't a fabrication, but a memory of something I'd already seen. That morning when I looked in the mirror, I saw a different woman. Tired, yes, but more determined. I knew I needed to talk to my sister to take the next step. And deep down, something told me that her revelations would be even harsher than I was prepared to hear. I woke on the day I was supposed to meet my sister with a heavy heart. The simple act of getting ready to see her seemed to carry an invisible weight. I chose a discreet outfit, nothing flashy, so as not to betray the tension consuming me inside. The mirror reflected a firm but tired woman. I took a deep breath before leaving the house. The walk to the cafe where we'd arranged to meet seemed longer than ever. Every red light was an invitation to give up. But I knew I needed to be there, face to face, to hear what she had to say. The doubt was unbearable. Would she confess? Or would she make up another excuse? When I arrived, she was already seated. She wore sunglasses, even on a cloudy day. A clear sign of discomfort. I greeted her with a brief, almost mechanical hug. The touch that had once been familiar now felt strange, distant. The bond between us was no longer the same. I ordered a coffee to hide my trembling hands. She fiddled with her cup, avoiding eye contact. The silence between us said more than any words. The tension was thick, almost palpable. I sensed something important was about to come out of her mouth. "I need to tell you something," she said, finally looking me in the eye. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Her breathing was heavy, like someone carrying a burden. My heart raced, but I kept my face neutral. I couldn't show anything before I heard everything. She began talking about how difficult things were. She said she felt alone, without support. She used vague words, as if trying to justify something without naming it directly. I listened, but deep down I already knew where this was going. I just didn't know how she would have the courage to say it. Little by little, she hinted that she had made mistakes. "I got close to someone I shouldn't have," she said, biting her lip. I held the cup tightly, controlling my anger. Each syllable was like a knife. But the most painful part was still to come, admitting who that someone was. I waited in silence. Silence once again became my greatest weapon. The long pause made her feel pressured to continue. She took a deep breath and lowered her eyes. "I didn't want it to be this way, but it happened." My heart felt like it was about to leap out of my chest. "He came to me first," she finally concluded. The world seemed to freeze in that instant. The confirmation I'd feared was there, before me, spoken in her own voice. I didn't need to hear the name. I already knew who she was talking about. I wanted to get up and leave, but I remained seated. The force holding me was the same one that told me not to show weakness. I continued listening as she tried to justify herself with empty phrases. "I didn't mean to hurt you. It was stronger than me." Words that healed nothing. I asked coldly, "Do you have any idea what you did?" She swallowed hard and nodded, tears welling in her eyes. There was no true remorse, only fear of exposure. The fear that the truth would come to light for everyone to see. She tried to touch my hand, but I pulled it away before contact. The feeling of revulsion was immediate. My own sister had crossed the most sacred line. The trust that had taken a lifetime to build had been silently destroyed behind my back. The waiter brought our orders, breaking the mood for a few seconds. She stirred her coffee without drinking, as if trying to buy time. I watched silently, thinking about how life can turn upside down in a single conversation. She insisted it was over, that there was nothing more between them. But her look betrayed uncertainty. I knew it wasn't the end. Their relationship was far from just a phase. It was deeper, dirtier, more devastating. I felt anger rise in my throat, but I didn't let it show. I simply replied, "You've destroyed more than you know." She lowered her head, ashamed. Silence once again fell over the table. And this time, there was nothing more that could be said to erase it. I calmly got up from the table, paid the bill, and said goodbye without a hug. The weight of betrayal was heavy in the air. I walked to the car, my legs heavy. It was as if every step was made on shards of glass. On the way back, I thought about what it would be like to face my husband that night. His theater no longer deceived me, but now I had direct confirmation. It wasn't just suspicions or technological evidence. It was the accomplice's own confession. Upon entering the house, I found everything silent. He hadn't arrived yet. The house seemed cold, strange, as if it carried the energy of lies impregnated in the walls. I sat on the couch and looked at the clock, waiting to hear the key turn in the door. When he entered, he brought the same rehearsed smile. He put the folder on the floor and came to me, trying to kiss me. I turned my face away, making it clear that something was different. He was surprised, but didn't ask. Perhaps he felt that the climate had changed. We ate dinner in silence. Each bite was an effort not to explode. He talked about trivial things, but I no longer listened. He just observed every detail, every movement. His face looked different, as if the mask had fallen off. Later, while he was watching TV, I went to his room and closed the door. I took out my notebook and wrote, "Today," she confessed. The words were marked on the page as a definitive record. There was no turning back. The truth was complete. I felt like telling someone at that moment. But who? Who would believe that my own husband and sister had cheated on me? The revelation would not only affect me, but the entire family. It was a bomb that could destroy much more than just my marriage. I lay down on the bed, but I couldn't sleep. Her confession repeated in my mind like an endless echo. I closed my eyes and saw the two of them together, laughing at me, deceiving me. The pain was so real it felt physical. I got up at dawn and looked out the window. The street was empty, but my mind was full. I thought about how, the next day, I would have to face yet another false routine. He pretending to be a husband, me pretending to be a wife. The theater was showing every day. His cell phone was on the bedside table. I picked it up and started searching calmly. I found quick calls to unnamed saved numbers. The times coincided with visits to my sister's house. There was no longer any doubt. Everything connected. I put the cell phone back and took a deep breath. Hatred and pain mixed inside me. It was difficult to bear the weight of everything alone. But I knew I needed it. The right time to exhibit had not yet arrived. In the morning, I prepared coffee as usual. He came in smiling, hugged me from behind and said, "Good morning, love." The coldness of the gesture made me shudder. The forced intimacy was now unbearable. I just poured the coffee and continued in silence. During work, I could barely concentrate. Her words echoed over and over again. He came to me first. This sentence was pounding in my head like a heavy hammer. The betrayal had been initiated by him. The choice had been his. At the end of the afternoon, I received a message from him saying that he would sleep later at the office. I looked at the screen and just smiled bitterly. I already knew exactly where he would be, and this time, I was willing to go after definitive confirmation. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and decided that I wouldn't wait any longer just for words. It was time to see with my own eyes, to record the truth without room for excuses. 'Cause deep down I knew the next night would change everything. As soon as I received the message saying he would stay in the office, I felt my body shake. Not out of fear, but out of determination. It was the opportunity I was waiting for to take the final test. I couldn't waste it. I dressed in simple clothes, tied my hair up, and took the car keys. The path to my sister's house seemed endless. Every red light increased my anxiety. The steering wheel sweated in my hands, but I didn't slow down. The feeling was that I was heading towards an inevitable truth. Nothing could stop me. I parked a few houses away and turned off the car. His heart was beating so hard that it seemed to echo inside the vehicle. The street was silent, just a few lights on in the neighboring windows. I looked at the familiar facade that now carried an unbearable weight. Minutes later, I saw his car approaching. I recognized the headlights from afar. He parked in front, hurried out, and entered the gate without hesitation. He didn't look around, like someone who already knows the terrain. It was the confirmation I needed. I took out my cell phone and took several photos. Each image was a concrete piece of the puzzle. The man who swore allegiance to me was walking into my own sister's house as if it were routine. There were no more excuses possible. There was no denying it. I remained inside the car, breathing deeply. Part of me wanted to run out and knock on the door. Another part told me to wait. The wait seemed unbearable but strategic. I didn't just want to catch him, I wanted to calmly dismantle his every lie. Time passed slowly. The light in the room came on, and through the cracks in the curtain I saw silhouettes moving. It was him, it was her. The image, even without clarity, hurt like a punch. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I thought about calling someone, but I couldn't. Shame paralyzed me. How can I explain that my husband was at my sister's house? The story sounded absurd, and yet it was my reality. Silence became my only company that night. I decided to record a quick video. I pointed the camera at his parked car, at the facade of the house, at the light on. My voice was low but firm. Here's the proof. It was like a record for myself, to never doubt what I saw. I stayed there for almost an hour watching. When the lights started to go out, I realized the night was ending. He would leave at any moment. My entire body shook, but I didn't back away. I needed to see him leave. I needed to close that cycle with my own eyes. And then, the door opened. He left smiling, adjusting his clothes, as if he had lived through an ordinary moment. He looked around quickly, but didn't see me. He got into the car and headed towards our house, with the expression on his face of someone who fears nothing. I waited a few minutes before starting the car. Driving behind him would be too risky, and I didn't want to mess it up. I took a deep breath, started the engine, and drove home in silence. Each kilometer covered seemed like an eternity. When I arrived, I saw his car parked in the garage. The light in the room was on, a sign that he had already arrived. I entered slowly, like someone returning from an ordinary day. But inside, I was broken. She was no longer the same woman. He was sitting on the couch with the TV on. He smiled when he saw me and said, "I thought you were gonna take a while." My throat caught, but I responded naturally. I decided to take a walk. He didn't suspect anything. The theater continued. I went up to the room and closed the door. I sat on the bed and watched the photos and video I had taken. Every image was a punch in the gut. But at the same time, each record was also a piece of freedom. I had the truth in my hands. I lay down unable to sleep. He came in later, lay down next to me, and passed out within minutes. How could I sleep peacefully after everything? I looked at him and wondered if he had ever been honest with me. Doubt was as cruel as certainty. The next day, I woke up before him. I prepared coffee in silence and watched as he got ready for work. He looked the same as always, but to me he was just a stranger. I saw an actor playing the husband. I decided not to confront him right away. Not yet. I needed to think about each step, because deep down I wanted more than just to throw the truth in his face. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he did. He wanted every lie to come back to crush him. I called my sister, but she didn't answer. Maybe he knew I had already seen it. Maybe he was afraid of the confrontation. Her silence said much more than any justification. Cowardice also has a voice. During work, I could barely pay attention. The scene from the night before replayed like a movie in my head. I saw his car parked, the door opening, the silhouettes behind the curtain. It was a memory that wouldn't go away anytime soon. I received a message from him. "I'm leaving early today. I thought we'd have dinner out." The audacity surprised me. After spending the night with my sister, I still had the courage to propose a romantic dinner. I smiled bitterly, but accepted. It's part of my plan. I spent the day thinking about what I would do. Show the evidence there in the restaurant, in front of everyone? Confront him at home in the silence of our room? Or wait even longer until you have every detail documented? The weight of the decision suffocated me. When we met in the evening, he was smiling, as if nothing had happened. He pulled out the chair for me, ordered wine, talked about work projects. I just listened, but inside I felt a mix of disgust and coldness. The man before me no longer existed. At one point I looked him in the eye and asked, "Are you sure you tell me everything?" He laughed and replied, "Of course, love, why wouldn't you?" I held the glass tightly, but I didn't shed a tear. The game was just beginning. I returned home with a clear decision. I would not explode. Not yet. The strongest revenge is not the one that screams. It is the one that waits. And I would wait for the exact moment for him to be unmasked with no chance of defense. That night I wrote in my notebook, "I have visual evidence. He is finished." The words gave me relief. It wasn't just an outburst. It was a record. Almost like a silent contract with myself. I wouldn't go back. I began to observe him with different eyes. Every gesture of affection was now just a performance. Every smile felt like a rehearsal. And the more he tried to keep the mask on, the clearer it became that, soon, it would fall. I knew I couldn't keep it forever. Family, friends, everyone had the right to know the truth. But I needed to choose the right moment, the perfect occasion. Because a revelation like this doesn't just destroy a marriage, it destroys entire structures. As I watched him sleep again, I thought about what his fall would be like. How would you react when seeing the photos, videos, records? How would you try to justify yourself in front of everyone? The scene was already formed in my mind. I just needed to pull the trigger at the right time. And it was there, in the silence of the early morning, that I understood. The next step would not just be gathering evidence. It would be putting him against his own conscience. And when that happened, there would be nowhere for him to run. I woke up that morning with a strange feeling of clarity. The sun came through the window, but inside me there was only darkness. I looked to the side and saw him sleeping peacefully as if the world was perfect. His calmness made me even more angry. I knew I needed to act smart. I went downstairs to prepare coffee, as I always did. While cutting the fruits, I thought about every detail I had recorded. Photos, videos, messages. I was no longer the deceived woman. I was the woman who knew everything and was just waiting for the moment to reveal it. When he entered the kitchen, he pretended to be normal. He kissed my head, asked about my day. I responded in short, emotionless sentences. He didn't notice the distance. He thought I was just tired. This blindness of his was to my advantage. I spent the day mentally organizing each step. Revenge could not be hasty. I didn't just want to confront him. I wanted to completely disarm him. He wanted there to be no escape, for every lie to turn against him like a mirror. In the afternoon, I received a message from him. Today I'm going straight to the gym after work. I read it and laughed alone. The excuse was too predictable, but I knew it wasn't training. I already had enough proof that the academy was just another smokescreen. I took advantage of his absence to call my sister. This time she answered, but her voice was strained. I asked if she was okay. She responded with short, insecure sentences. It was clear that the weight of the secret was suffocating. The silence between us was almost deafening. I wanted to scream on that call, but I stopped myself. I just said, "You know that I know." Her silence on the other side was telling. No denial, no protest, just heavy breathing. The call ended like that, dryly, leaving everything that had already been set up in the air. After that, I sat on the couch and stared at the family photos on the wall. Every image seemed to mock me. Travel, parties, hugs. It was like looking at an album of illusions. The life I thought I lived now seemed like a theater stage to deceive me. I decided I needed more than visual proof. I wanted indirect witnesses. I started to observe social interactions, likes on social networks, disguised comments, messages at unusual times. Everything was there, visible to anyone who wanted to see. A close friend commented to me, "He is different, more vain, more worried about his cell phone." I smiled without responding, but inside I confirmed every word. Even outsiders already noticed signs. I wasn't crazy, I never was. In the evening when he arrived, I casually asked, "How is the gym?" He responded automatically, "Tough, but it was worth it." I observed every detail, the lack of sweat, the absence of the training backpack. Everything showed that it was just another lie. At dinner, I remained silent, analyzing every gesture. He talked about work, about a new project. I just nodded without going deeper. The theater continued, but now I was the conscious spectator, and the show was about to end. Later, he went to the shower and left his cell phone unlocked on the table. I caught it quickly. I went into a notes app and found date reminders. Dates and times recorded, disguised as meetings. It was written confirmation of everything. I took photos of the notes and returned the cell phone to the same place. My heart was racing, but my face remained calm. He came out of the shower smiling, without imagining that I had just dismantled another part of the hoax. I went to sleep pretending to be tired, but, in reality, I was more awake than ever. The body lying next to me was just a shell. The man I loved no longer existed. All that was left was the image of a traitor. The next morning, I decided to go to his work as a surprise. I told myself it was just a loving visit, but in reality, it was a test. I wanted to see if he really was where he said he was. When I arrived, I discovered that there were no meetings scheduled. The table mate commented, He didn't stop by today, he must have taken the day off. I smiled politely, but inside I felt my blood boil. The lie was more open than ever. I returned home with a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at the betrayal, relief at having more proof. I didn't need to look any further. All the pieces were already in my hand. All that was left was to decide when to use it. At the end of the afternoon, I received a message from him. "I'm going to be late today, don't wait for me." His audacity impressed me. I had already seen the car at my sister's house, I had time records, I even had notes about it. And yet, he continued to lie. I sat in the living room and imagined the scene. Him entering her house, smiling, as if he were safe. With each mentalized detail, the anger grew. But with it came coldness. The certainty that patience was my most lethal weapon. I decided to call a trusted lawyer. I didn't tell everything, but I asked for information about separations and division of assets. I listened calmly, wrote down the details. That call brought me clarity. When the confrontation came, I would be ready in every aspect. In the evening he arrived later, as he had said. It brought a different perfume, which was not the usual one. He sat down next to me on the couch and asked, "Is everything okay?" I just replied, "Everything's great." The smile I gave was icy. He didn't notice. The next day, I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. He was a neighbor of my sister. She said she had seen my husband going in and out of there often. My breathing hitched for a few seconds. The truth was spreading. Shame and anger mixed inside me. It wasn't just about me anymore. Now other people knew, even if indirectly. The secret was about to get out of control, and I needed to act before he tried to reverse the story. I looked at my cell phone and saw all the tests organized. Photos, prints, videos, records, everything ready to be exposed. But there was still one final piece missing: direct confrontation. And I knew that moment was very close. When he arrived that night, I noticed something different in his eyes. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just tiredness. But for the first time, I felt that he was suspicious of my silence. The mask game was starting to fall apart. During dinner I asked, "Do you think secrets always come out?" He looked at me with brief astonishment, but quickly hid it. He laughed and said, "It depends on the secret, love." That answer echoed like a warning. He already sensed something. I felt the tension between us was almost palpable. The silence that once comforted him now made him uneasy. He didn't know how much I already knew, and that uncertainty was what kept me going. Before going to sleep, I wrote down in my notebook, "He senses it. But he still doesn't imagine the scale of what will come." The words gave me a strange sense of power. I was no longer the victim. I was the piece that controlled the board. And it was that night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, that I made the decision. The time to confront was coming. And when it arrived, there would be no room for retreat. Because this time, I would be the one to dictate the rules of the end. I woke up determined. I couldn't put it off any longer. The confrontation needed to happen soon, but I wanted it to be at a time when he was most comfortable, without imagining anything. This way, the fall would be more painful, and I would have the satisfaction of seeing the mask fall before my eyes. I spent the morning planning every detail. While making coffee, I thought about how to conduct the conversation. It couldn't just be an attack. It needed to be calculated with evidence on the table so that he had no way out. I didn't want an argument. I wanted the destruction of the lie. He came down, as always, adjusting his tie. He sat at the table, drank his coffee, looked at his cell phone. Everything seemed normal. But for me, it was like watching a criminal rehearsing the life of an innocent man. I watched him in silence, recording every detail of the scene. When he left for work, I took a deep breath. I turned on the computer and started organizing the tests into folders. Photos in one, prints in another, separate bank records. I created a file just for the video of the night I saw him enter my sister's house. Nothing would escape. In the afternoon, I met a close friend to vent, told a good part of the story, without mentioning names. She listened in silence and, in the end, just said, "You deserve more than this." That phrase kept echoing inside me like a reminder that I wasn't wrong. I returned home determined to test his limits. I sent a simple message. "Today I want to have dinner with you." He quickly responded, "Of course, I'll love it." I smiled bitterly. His enthusiasm seemed like the rehearsal of someone who believed he had everything under control. In the evening, we went to a restaurant that we always went to on special occasions. The environment had low music, soft lighting, and an intimate atmosphere. He pulled out the chair for me, ordered wine, tried to create the perfect atmosphere. I knew that scenario would be ideal to start with. During dinner, I brought up banal topics. I asked about work, about future trips. He replied smiling, confident. The more he talked, the more I was sure he didn't suspect anything. It was like watching an actor performing for an audience that already knew the end of the play. In a quiet moment, I looked him in the eye and asked, "Have you ever lied to me?" He paused for a second, but then laughed. "Everyone lies at one time or another, right?" I gave a discreet smile, but I already had the answer inside me. He was nervous. I didn't insist at that moment. I kept the question in the air, like a planted seed. I wanted him to spend the night pondering what I might or might not know. This psychological game was part of my strategy. Doubt is the liar's greatest enemy. We returned home in silence. He tried to break the mood by playing music in the car. I just looked out the window, watching the streets pass by. But inside I calculated each step. The confrontation was getting closer and closer. I felt it. At home, he turned on the TV and settled down on the couch. I took my notebook and went to the room. I wrote, "Today I saw the fear in his eyes. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. The fear that something was about to be revealed." The next day, the routine continued normally. He left early. I stayed at home organizing some things. But my mind was elsewhere. I thought about what the impact would be of putting all the evidence in front of him, with no possibility of escape. I decided to visit my mother that afternoon. We talked about simple topics, but when I looked at her, I felt a tightness in my chest. I thought about how devastating it would be for her to find out that two people so close to her had betrayed me. The secret was no longer just my burden, it was a poison ready to spread. In the evening, when he arrived, he brought flowers. Smiling, he said, "I remembered you today." I held the bouquet, thanked him, but inside I knew it was just a disguise. The flowers didn't bring beauty, they smelled like lies. During dinner, I said little. He tried to make conversation, but I just responded with short sentences. I noticed that he began to feel uncomfortable with my silence. His restlessness was visible. That's what I wanted, to make him uncomfortable without understanding why. Later, while he was showering, I went to the garage. I discreetly opened the car's glove compartment and found receipts for purchases made near my sister's house. I picked one up and kept it. It was more proof. Simple but indisputable. When he got out of the shower, I sat on the bed and looked at him. I asked, "Have you been near my sister's house in the last few days?" He laughed nervously and replied, "Of course not. Why?" Just smile, without saying anything. Doubt planted again would make him uneasy. I spent the night watching him in silence. Every movement, every gesture. The cell phone never left his hands. It was as if he was afraid I would discover something. And that fear already told me everything I needed to know. During the early hours of the morning, I got up and went to the living room. I looked at the pile of evidence stored away. Photos, videos, receipts, prints. It was like an arsenal ready to be used. I stood there for a few minutes, thinking about how devastating it would be to put them on the table. The next day, he left earlier than usual. He said he had an urgent meeting. I just nodded. I took the car and discreetly followed. I confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't going to work. The path was different. Once again, towards her house. This time, I didn't get so close. I just recorded it from afar. Quick photos without attracting attention. Another record for the collection. Each image was a stab, but also a brick in the wall of truth I was building against him. I came home and sat on the couch, exhausted. The pain was great, but the feeling of control kept me steady. I was no longer the woman deceived without proof. I was the woman who had the power of truth in her hands. In the afternoon, I received a text from my sister. "We need to talk." I read it and took a deep breath. It was inevitable. She was about to break the silence again. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was regret. But I already knew. No word from her would erase what I saw. I decided not to respond right away. I left the message without return so that she felt the pressure of silence. Silence once again was my weapon, because it made the other side get lost in assumptions. In the evening, he came back early, trying to be affectionate. He hugged me, made jokes, praised my dinner. I just smiled in a controlled way. He didn't realize that behind the smile there was a plan afoot. After dinner, I sat on the couch and stared at him. I asked, "Do you think secrets can last forever?" He looked away, playing with his cell phone. He replied, "It depends on the secret." I just continued looking, not saying anything. The silence spoke for me. Later, lying in bed, I thought about everything I had in my hands. The evidence, the messages, the indirect confessions. Everything formed a perfect picture of betrayal, and I knew that his fall would be much greater than I imagined. I took out my cell phone and reviewed the video of him leaving my sister's house. I watched it several times until I felt my body shake. It was painful but also empowering, because there was the certainty that I wasn't inventing anything. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and understood that the next stage was defined. It was no longer enough to observe. Now it was time to act. And when I took the next step, nothing would be the same again. I scheduled a family lunch as if it were just another ordinary Sunday. I put the evidence in a discreet envelope and kept it in my bag as if it were just my wallet. I arrived early, set the table, organized the dishes and flowers, maintaining the appearance of normality. When everyone was seated, I talked about trivial matters, as if nothing was about to happen. But inside, every word was calculated, because I knew I was driving every detail of that scene. In the middle of the conversation, when the room fell silent, I opened the envelope and spread the papers on the table right next to his plate. Location prints, photos, records. The napkin slid off and fell to the floor, but no one moved to pick it up. The air became dense, heavy, as if time had stopped. I saw his face turn pale, his hand shake, his breathing hitch. The expression of someone who always had an answer for everything now crumbled in the face of the truth. My mother looked at the evidence in shock. My father stood still, unable to utter a word. My sister lowered her eyes, not having the courage to face anyone. He tried to explain himself, mumbled disjointed sentences, but his voice was unsteady. It was the speech of a man trapped, with no way out. The lie, which was previously protected by silence, was now exposed to the light, naked, visible to everyone. I stood up calmly, without raising my voice, and held the envelope again. I looked at everyone around the table and just said, "Here's the whole truth." I didn't need to add anything else, because the truth spoke itself. The silence in the room was more deafening than any scream could be. The calm in my tone cut deeper than anger ever could. As I put the envelope back, I felt the weight of the decision spread into the air. It wasn't just about me, it was about everyone there, watching the fall of an image that never really existed. He was alone, and everyone knew it. What would come after that moment could not be contained because, when the truth settles at a family table, it is never forgotten. He tried to hold my hand under the table, but I slowly removed it, looking straight at him. The shame on his face didn't need words. Everyone had already understood what was happening. I stood up calmly, held the envelope to my chest, and took a deep breath. His downfall had started there, but the biggest impact was yet to come, when every detail came to light in front of those he least expected. He tried to hold my hand under the table, but I slowly removed it, keeping my gaze firmly on him. The shame on his face needed no explanation. Everyone had already understood the weight of what was before them. I held the envelope to my chest, letting the evidence speak for me. The silence was broken only by his cell phone vibrating on the table. And at that moment, I realized that the next ring would reveal something even deeper than everyone there imagined.